Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwaraha, Guru Sakshat Param Brahma, Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. Namaskaram and Vanakkam, my dear friends. Today we are about to answer a question that many people have raised. Many people have asked if women in the Vedic times and in the ancient times of India had freedom, independence, and rights to education. The question appears to be very simple, and many of us tend to think that women in those ages did not have adequate freedom, were all the time suppressed, were looked at as mere objects, were not given enough respect, and probably were not allowed to study. There is an old Tamil saying which goes like this: அடுப்பூதும் பெண்களுக்கு படிப்பெதற்கு. From this saying, many of us tend to think women were not allowed to study, because this adage, freely translated, will say, why should a woman who is only be stuck to the stuff which is used for cooking, why should she be educated? Friends, this adage probably came into existence sometime during the medieval times, not during the Vedic times, or not during the times of the Itihasas and Smritis. Let us go back a little in history and see how things were. The Grihya Sutra, Ashvalayana Grihya Sutra, this Grihya Sutra talks about the way a child should be named. We all know that once a child is born, there are certain rituals performed and the child is given a name. This Grihya Sutra talks about the ceremony of naming and then also says as to how a child should be named. We find a difference in the way the name should be given to a boy child and a girl child. It says the boy child should be given names with even number of syllables. The syllables in the name should be in multiples of 2 or 4 or 6 or 8. That is for a boy child. When it comes to the name of a girl child, it says the name should have an odd number of syllables. So in the naming process, we find that there is a difference. But please hold. The difference is only in the number of syllables in relation to the name. There is no difference that a child should be given 2 names. Yes, the Grihya Sutra says any child should be given 2 names. One name which will be used by everyone, including the parents, the kith and the kin, and this name will be called the Sam Vyavaharika Nama, meaning the name that will be used for general purposes. Samanya Vyavaharika. It will be used for normal purposes. The child will be called by that name until the time the child reaches the age of Upanayana. or the time when the child goes to the Guru. Now, the same Grihya Sutra says, please give the child another name. This is a command to the parents. It says the parents should give the child another name, and this name should be known only to the parents until the time the Upanayana is performed or until the time the child is taken to the Guru. Well, this name will be told to the Guru, and that will become the Abhivadaniya Nama, meaning when the child bows down to the Guru, the child will utter this name and perform Abhivadaye. Please see, there is no difference between the boy child and the girl child. The boy should be given two names. The girl should also be given two names. What does it imply? It only indicates that the girl will also be taken to the Guru, or the girl will also be put in the path of education. So, are we right in saying that girls were denied the rights to education? No. Girls had their own rights to education. We do find several of them during the Vedic times were seers, were poets, were well educated. They had all their rights towards education. There is something called the daily Rishi Tarpana that every one of us is supposed to perform. At least every Grahastha is supposed to perform. In this Rishi Tarpana, you find the Grahastha is supposed to perform Tarpana towards rishis who lived long time ago. They were our ancestors, and we are supposed to perform rites and rituals towards them, respect them. In that list of rishis, we find the names of three women: Gargi Vachaknavi, Pratyeyi, and then Sulama Maitreyi. These three women are still regarded as seers who are to be respected by each one of us in our daily worship and daily prayers. So again, we find evidences that women were educated, women were Brahmavadinis, and women were respected as great seers. I would like to draw your attention to the use of certain terms. When we say Guru, what do we mean? A Guru is a teacher. Okay? What could be the other names for this teacher? When you say Acharya, when you say Upadhyaya, it means we are referring to a Guru or a teacher. We have heard stories about Gurus and their ashramas, Gurukulas. What would be the wife of a Guru called? Guru Patni. Okay? Now, when you say Acharya, what would be the wife of this Acharya called? What would be the name given to the wife of a Upadhyaya? We find the name given to a Upadhyaya's wife is Upadhyayani, and the name given to an Acharya's wife is Acharyani. But then there are also other terms which indicate that women were gurus, women teachers were there. These women teachers were referred to as Acharyi and Upadhyayi. In contrast to Upadhyayani, we call a woman teacher Upadhyayi, and we call a woman teacher Acharyi. The very existence of these terms, differentiating from a Guru Patni, would only tell us that there were women teachers. If women teachers were available, it only means women had rights to education and women could have the freedom of selecting their own disciples. Arundhati, whom we have already seen, she was a Rishi Patni on one hand. On the other, she herself was a teacher. And then it said that she was a teacher par excellence, that she would only choose a disciple who was really desirous of knowledge. So that was her level. She would choose her disciple. We find any number of such examples where we find women had their own freedom, they had their own rights towards education. They were not denied education, probably due to various influences during the medieval times. All this Vedic tradition or the post Vedic tradition was lost. And let us not blame anyone now, but then try and understand that this land of ours had a good tradition and try and bring back that tradition into implementation. We find lots of these women who were able to pursue education, who were able to impart education to others, and who were also able to run their lives the way they wanted. It is also true that women had their own independence and the power to decide their future. That is why we find several stories about Swayamvaras. Women were given the right to choose their husbands. Not only that, they had their rights to choose their future. I would like to draw examples from the South with regard to the latter. In South India, sometime around the 7th and 8th centuries, lived women who could decide as to what they wanted to do. One such example is Sangili Nachiyar. In the present city of Chennai is a small place called Thiruvattriyur, and we find Sangili was one who was living in this area of Thiruvattriyur. Thiruvattriyur has a huge temple dedicated to Lord Tyagesa. Tyagesa is a form of Lord Shiva. Sangili was the daughter of a wealthy, prosperous person. But then she decided that she would not marry. Please remember, the time that I'm talking about is not 20th century or 21st century, but then sometime in the 8th century. In the 8th century itself, this girl had the independence to decide that she would not marry, but then live as someone who would perform Kainkariya to Lord Shiva in the temple. She had the liberty to say so. She spoke to her parents, convinced her parents, who of course naturally wanted the daughter to get married. But she convinced the parents and made the father build what is called a Kannimadam. Kanya is an unmarried girl, isn't it? So unmarried girls would build what is called a Kanyamadam and remain in the Kanyamadam and perform Kainkariya in the temple. This is when she was seen by Sundaramurti Swamigal, and of course, Sundaramurti Swamigal fell in love with her and wanted to marry her, and then Lord Tyagesa himself mediated the marriage. But then we find an example where the girl was in a position to decide that what she wanted she could get. Sometime around the same time or a little earlier, we find the instance of a girl called Poompavi. We have already seen in brief the life of Poompavi. Let us recollect now. Poompavi was the daughter of a very wealthy merchant who lived in Mylapore, again a part of the city of Chennai. And this girl was brought up by the father, all the time saying that he would give her in marriage to Tirunjana Sambandar. Tirunjana Sambandar was born in a small town called Sirgadi and was an ardent devotee of Lord Shiva. The father had heard about Tirunjana Sambandar and wanted his own daughter to be married to that young lad from Sirgadi. It so happened that one day this little girl was bitten by a snake, and then she succumbed to the snake bite and died. And the father was grief struck. She was the only daughter. Of course, nothing else could be done. The daughter was dead. The father performed the last rites to the daughter, and then he collected the ashes. As he was collecting the ashes, he had a sudden thought. What am I doing? I brought this girl up saying that she belongs to Tirunjana Sambandar and wanted her to be married to Tirunjana Sambandar. Now I'm collecting the ashes and I'm about to dispose of these, but it's not correct. I said the daughter belongs to him, so I will keep the ashes in preservation. I'll keep the ashes in a pot. I'll keep it there. One day, I will give this pot to Tirunjana Sambandar. After all, the girl belonged to him. So one day, I'll meet him and tell him about everything and then let him decide. So the father collected the ashes, put it in a pot and kept it aside. After some time, maybe after a few months, the father heard the information that Tirunjana Sambandar was visiting Tiruvattriyur. Tiruvattriyur and Mylapore, they are parts of the city of Chennai, but then Tiruvattriyur is in the northern area and Mylapore is in the east. Quite a distance of about 15 kilometers or so. And when the father heard the information that Tirunjana Sambandar was visiting Tiruvattriyur, he himself went to Tiruvattriyur, met Tirunjana Sambandar, bowed to him, and invited him to come to Mylapore. Mylapore is the place where the temple dedicated to Lord Kapalishwara is there. So the father invited Tirunjana Sambandar, please come to Mylapore, please come to Kapalishwara. And Tirunjana Sambandar also agreed. The father made a long pandal stretching from Tiruvattriyur to Mylapore and brought Tirunjana Sambandar under that, the canopy, the long canopy which extended from Tiruvattriyur to Mylapore, he brought him. Tirunjana Sambandar reached Mylapore. Once he came to Mylapore, as he was about to go into the temple, this father called Sivanesa Chettiar bowed and said, this is the old story. This is what happened to my daughter, and here is the pot of ashes. Tirunjana Sambandar looked at the pot and then sang hymns dedicated to Lord Kapali. not directly dedicated to Kapali, but then kind of asking the girl who's dead and gone, only her ashes are there in the pot, asking that girl, why did you go? Perinjanthi Kanade Podiyo Pumpavai. The girl's name was Pumpavai. So in the lyrics, in the hymns, Tirunyan Sambandar would ask, why did you go away? You did not see this festival of this temple. You did not see the other festival of this temple. This temple has a holy tradition of so many festivals. And why did you go without seeing all these festivals? These festivals of Lord Kapali and Goddess Karpagambal. Why did you go away? And you know what happened? Call it by any name, the girl came back to life. From the ashes, Pumpavi came back to life. Now, the story does not end there. The father, who was so happy and joyous to see the girl come back to life, went to Tirunyan Sambandar and said, I brought this girl up saying that she would one day be your wife. Now she's come back to life. So please take her. Please accept her. But what was the position of Tirunyan Sambandar? Tirunyan Sambandar had brought her back to life. So he said, I'm sorry, I have brought her back to life, which means she is like a daughter to me. Tirunyan Sambandar was barely 16 at that time, but nevertheless, it is not the age, it is the functional level. So he said, I've brought her back to life and I'm like the father. She is like my daughter. A father cannot marry the daughter. Saying so, Tirunyan Sambandar, after worshipping at Kapalishwara, went back to his place. And this girl was left. And you know what this girl decided? She said, Appa, you told me, when I was growing up, you told me that Tirunyan Sambandar is my husband. Fine. Destiny had it otherwise and things changed. But do not expect me to marry anyone else. I decide to remain separate, alone, and perform Kainkarya to Kapalishwara and Karpagambal. So she convinced the father to build a Kanyamadam and remained alone to perform Sivatondu or Kainkarya to Lord Shiva. Even today, a separate shrine can be seen in the Mylapore temple, very close to the Western Tower, and in that shrine is Angan Pumpavi, and of course, within the same shrine, we find Tirunyan Sambandar also standing. I'm narrating this story not to indicate the greatness of Tirunyan Sambandar or to say that such was the society at that point of time. There is another small thing that we have to notice there. This was around the 7th century. Tirunyan Sambandar belonged to the Kaundinya Gotra and was born in a family of Brahmins. And here was Sivanesa Chettiar, who was keeping his daughter to be married to Tirunyan Sambandar, and the society had no objection to it. These are not the things that I am trying to tell you now. Of course, these are things which we need to think of. At the same time, I am now trying to tell you this girl had complete independence to decide as to what her course of action would be. So these are all examples to tell us that women of India had rights to education, had rights to decide as to what they would do. In the Vedas, we find several mantras which have been composed by women seers. We find a long poetic tradition. Vagdevi composed hymns. Gargi composed hymns. And they were all given respect. They were all regarded as not only great women, but also as women who could impart education to others. In the Upanishads, we find there are two types of vidyas talked about. Friends, we all know vidya will mean education here. In fact, Narada talks about different disciplines of education. Disciplines will mean something like chemistry, biology, botany, zoology, and things. So Narada talks about various kinds of disciplines. He talks about astronomy, biology, areas where you think about this, study about that, and know about something else. And then says, if you know all these, it'll only amount that you're a Shastravid. Shastravid will mean somebody who knows the Shastras. And then he says, if I know all these, if I know chemistry, if I know biology, if I know botany, if I know astronomy, if I know nanotechnology, if I know civil engineering, if I know medicine, I know all this. But then all this will mean that I am a Shastravid and not an Atmavid. Atmavid is one who realizes the Parampurul or the Paramatma, and a Shastravid is one who knows the various Shastras or is adept in various disciplines of so-called education. The same thing is talked about in Chandogya Upanishad, giving a slightly different name. In the Upanishad, we find the conversation between a guru and his disciple. The disciple asks him, Guru, can you classify education? Without directly responding to the disciple's question, the guru asks him as to what he learned the previous day. The disciple said, yesterday you taught me about the plants. Fine. You know everything about the plants? Yes. Right. You pack all that information into one mote or one kind of, big gunny bag. You pack everything into one big package. Keep it there. Fine. Done. What did you learn day before? I learnt about the stars. You know everything about the stars? Yes. Now pack all that and place it there, another package. Similarly, what you learned the previous day, the fourth previous day, the fifth previous day, pack everything, big, huge packages, place them all. Now please tell me, the guru is now asking, please tell me, by learning all these, huge packages, have you experienced or known anything about Paramatma? The disciple draws a blank. And then the guru says, all this which does not give you anything about Paramatma is in one side. On the other side, you place that knowledge or that education which makes you identify Paramatma and realize Paramatma. And then the guru says, you wanted classification of education. Now you have two classes. One class where you can realize Paramatma, that is Paravidya. On the other, you have any number of baggages, but then you don't realize Paramatma, that is Aparavidya. What was called Shastra Vidya is Aparavidya. What was called Atma Vidya is Paravidya. And the Upanishads very clearly say, girls have access to both. If a girl wants to be a Shastravid, she can be. And if she wants to be an Atmavid, she can pursue experiential education and become an Atmavid also. So girls were not denied education as we think, but then they had their own liberty to choose as to what they want to be. We have any number of names which indicate to us that girls were of all these kinds. We have a seer by name Sulaba. We find her in Mahabharata, and she travels quite a distance to reach a king. And then the king, who himself was almost a Rajarishi, took her as a teacher because she was great in her own respect. She was a stranger. She came from somewhere. She had no wealth with her. She had no support. But then, giving importance to her knowledge and to the Vidya that she had, the king accepted her as his teacher. So, can we say that women were denied rights? Can we say that women were deprived of whatever respect was due to them? We would be wrong to say so, isn't it? We look at it from a very superficial aspect and we come to certain conclusions. But then, if we go deep into the Itihasas, into the Puranas, into the Shastras, we find women did have their place of due respect. 8 women poetesses have been talked about in several of the sutras. We find the names like Roha, Reva, Anulabdhi, Shashireka, and so on, and these were all great poetesses of their ages. In the Mahabharata, we find several of them. I would like to draw your attention to one woman whom we do not even understand properly in the Mahabharata. Have you guessed as to who that woman is? And that is Gandhari. Gandhari was a princess of the Gandhara kingdom, and that is why she was called Gandhari. This again is a kind of a tradition. Several times we find girls were named after the fathers, or girls were named after the kingdom to which they belonged. It only means that the girls were given due respect. In fact, in one place, Kalidasa says, a Kanya is the Kula Deva, or she is important to the family. And that is why we find the names of girls being related to the kingdoms to which they belong. Mithila is a city. Mithila was a city in the kingdom in which Sita was growing up, and that is why she is called Maithili. Similarly, we find Gandhari was the princess of the country of Gandhara, or the land of Gandhara. And what happened to Gandhari? She was to be married to a person who did not have eyesight. So she decided that she would tie a piece of cloth around her eyes, so that she would not want to see anything that her husband would not see. But then we find the intelligence of Gandhari, her maturity at a very, very distant instance. The war is about to begin. The Kurukshetra war is about to begin. And Duryodhana, Gandhari's son, comes to her. We all have known Gandhari as a person who was very, very jealous of Kunti and Madri, and she would not wait for the child to be born. She would do some damage to the unborn fetus, and that is why that fetus got disintegrated into different pieces, and Vyasa had to come and kind of save those pieces, and 100 sons were born. We have heard of all these stories. So we only think of Gandhari as a person who is very jealous of others. We only think of Gandhari as someone who could not tolerate things to be wrought by others, and she was very impatient. This is what we think of her. But then here is another instance. This is just before the war. Duryodhana comes to her, falls at her feet, and asks for her Ashirvad. What do we expect? Here is the mother who is so fond of her children, the mother who could not wait for the son to be born. When she heard Kunti has had a son, she was so impatient. She would do something in such a way that her unborn child would disintegrate into pieces, and then she would cry, but then get 100 sons because of sage Vyasa. Such kind of a person, she is now standing, and the son has come, the eldest son has come. And the eldest son is asking for her benediction. He is about to go to the war. What do we normally expect? We would think she would have blessed him. She would have told that he should be victorious. No, she did not. And that is where we see the other side of Gandhari. You know what she said? Yatra dharmas tatra jayaha. Wherever dharma is, there will be victory. She didn't want to say, Duryodhana, you're not dharmic. Probably that was the mother's side. She, of course, was an ordinary human being. She had the emotions of a mother. So as a mother, she could not tell him that he was wrong. As a mother, she wanted to support the son, and that is what we find in anyone, even in these days, isn't it? A mother will not be able to push away the child, even if the child does a mistake. The mother cannot throw the child away. And that is what we see in that aspect of Gandhari. She could not kind of tell him, Duryodhana, you're wrong. She just witnessed whatever he did. But then she also could not tell him that he will be victorious. That was the other side of Gandhari, the intelligent side, the side which knew what would happen if someone is adharmic. So she said, wherever dharma is, there will be victory. What did she mean by that? If she had thought Duryodhana was dharmic, if she had thought Duryodhana was correct, she would have said, victory be with you. But she knew within the heart of hearts that Duryodhana was wrong. And she also did not have the mind to say, victory be with you, because she knew Duryodhana was wrong. So she cleverly put it, indicating to Duryodhana that he would fall down, indirectly telling him that he was wrong. She said, wherever there is dharma, victory be there. And this statement of Gandhari, this very intelligent, realistic statement of Gandhari has become the key sentence of dharmic principles. Many times we don't even realize that this statement was made by Gandhari, but then all of us do understand the import of this statement, and we all believe yatra dharma tatra jayaha. That was Gandhari, the other side of Gandhari. Can we say Gandhari was not intelligent? Gandhari was intelligent. Gandhari was educated. Gandhari was mature. But then probably because of the circumstances in which she was, all her intelligence, all her realization could not be manifested. What do we learn from Gandhari? On one side, from Gandhari, we learn that it's easy for someone with perseverance to control oneself. She controlled herself when she tied a piece of cloth around her eyes. She didn't want to see. Think of it this way. If I now tell you, for about 20 seconds, keep your eyes closed. If I give a command now, let all of us close our eyes for 20 seconds. Think what would happen. 10 seconds, 11th second, someone will partially open the eye like that. Another person will open like that. And what do? We tend to see if the next person is trying to open the eyes. Oh, not only me. He also is open. She also is open. That's what we do, isn't it? For 20 seconds, we cannot keep our eyes closed. But here was a lady who decided consciously on her own to tie her eyes and would deny herself of vision. That was a kind of a self control. That is one lesson that we can learn from her. Of course, she was also given to circumstances, she was also given to emotions. Probably that is a side that we should not learn. But then we can learn another lesson from her, that she knew, come what may, to her own kith and kin, if anyone is not on the side of Dharma, that person will not be victorious. That is an eternal lesson that Gandhari has given us. Gandhari has reminded us of the permanent lesson that we all should learn. There are several of them. Of course, as a human being, there would sometimes be some negative attributes. It is for us to open our eyes and then leave the negative attributes and take only the positive attributes for ourselves and progress further. Friends, let's meet sometime later with information about great women of India. Namaskar and thank you.